All right, good afternoon and welcome to this week's GEMA View Virtual Industry Talk focused on business development, sales, and sponsorship. These weekly virtual talks are sponsored by the Georgetown Entertainment and Media Alliance and the Cawley Career Center. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to connect virtually with fellow Hoyas for this industry-specific discussion. I'm Justin Spence, Associate Director of Regional Alliances at Georgetown, and I'll be facilitating today's virtual talk. Before we get started, I'd like to share a few tips and reminders. This event, as you can see, is being held via Zoom meeting and each participant has been muted upon entry. Please keep yourselves muted during the panel discussion to cut down on background noise and any disruptions. The panelists will take questions at the end of this discussion. Please send in your questions as you have them using the chat function in the Zoom control panel below. Also, if you're having any technical difficulties or other issues, please submit those concerns via the chat function on the panel below. Without any further ado, I'm pleased to turn things over to Rich Battista.
Thank you, Justin, and welcome everyone to our what is our third virtual panel that we are presenting over the summer. And I want to specifically welcome our GEMA View program students who are on, as well as a number of other of you. So great to have everyone on, and excited to kick off our panel here. The topic of this panel is business development and sales, sponsorships, partnerships. We have three terrific panelists with us, and those are Molly Stiers. Say hello, Molly.
Hello. We
have Palash Ahmed.
Hey, guys.
And we have Paul Malandra. So the way I want to do this is we're going to have a discussion. I'll have a discussion with the three of them for probably about 40 minutes, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A session. So I prefer if we hold the questions until we get to that session. Obviously, once we get to that session, you can verbally ask a question, or please feel free to put questions into the chat box either during this or once we start the Q&A. So I want to start by, just to level set, to have each of you say which company you work for, what your title is there, and just give a minute or so of what actually your job entails. So why don't we start with Molly?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Molly. I am a global sponsorship manager at Manchester United. I'm based here in London, and I've been in my role for about a year and a half. And what my job entails is seeking commercial partners for the club. So we traveled all over the world, speaking with CMOs and CEOs of brands across so many different industries and so many different markets all over the world. And all of our partnerships are completely bespoke and customized. And so as a result of that, we spend a lot of time in dialogue with these marketers and executives to understand what their business challenges are, what their messaging or unique value propositions are that they want to convey, and objectives for the brand and the business, and work to design a partnership framework that can deliver against those objectives. And so I can talk a little bit more about the brand and world football and as kind of conversations go on, but that's, in a nutshell, it's trying to craft partnerships that solve business challenges for brands, both kind of B2B and B2C challenges alike.
Terrific, thank you. Palash?
Palash Ahmed. I'm a Senior Vice President at Sony Pictures. And my role is really around corporate development and strategy. So first, starting with thinking about the long-term 5-year or plus strategy for the television and the pictures business. Where do we want to be? What sort of assets we need to succeed and compete effectively? And then turn around and find companies to buy or partner with, across the world. So, when we think about all our different verticals, whether it's, just content creation or distribution, or some of the things that enable content creation. For example, I've done tech deals where we're looking for patents and we're looking for technology that can support production, like virtual production and things like that, to, looking at different markets. I'm doing a joint venture right now in India We're looking at selling or buying assets really around the world, everything under the pictures vertical. And then there's this one other aspect of my role is, what we call the One Sony role, where we, a group of us from different Sony divisions meet regularly to talk about how we can help each other and, how the pictures business can help the PlayStation business or the music business and collaborate different ways, look at new technologies, new partners. So it's sort of a mixed bag of many things, but I would say it's, strategy and corporate development is underlying.
Great, thank you. Paul?
Hey everyone, Paul Malandra here. I most recently handled business development for Warner Media Direct to Consumer to launch the new streaming service HBO Max, but I'm actually starting a new role at Google on Monday. So you've caught me in the middle of a transition time, doing similar things across both, which is really I handle business development for streaming video and other consumer entertainment products. I work with product teams and marketing teams to come up with sort of new ways to drive subscribers to the product, new ways to grow our user base, new ways to partner with third parties to implement different types of consumer use cases. So for example, co-viewing was something I was exploring a lot at Warner, given everything that's happened with COVID. And we were talking to a whole range of partners that might be able to support different co-viewing use cases.
Terrific. Well, I want to, the first part of this conversation, I'd like to talk more about your careers and how your careers developed over time and where you sort of first found your entry point into the entertainment media space. So why don't we, maybe Palash, we'll start with you. You went to business school you got an MBA at Georgetown, so not undergrad, but can you talk a little bit about how you made your first foray into entertainment media, or what were you thinking about when you were leaving college? Did you know you wanted to be in this industry, or what were your kind of thoughts right as you were leaving college, and what were you thinking about? And then how did you move into this industry?
Well, mine is an unusual path, not one that would be recommended for others. So I started in the music business actually as more of a creative. So I was I started as a DJ many years ago, and in high school even, and I became a big enough DJ in DC. I grew up in DC that I started making records, producing records. And so all throughout college, I produced records, DJ'd, and then after college, I had a degree in finance, and I joined E&Y. But during that time, I was continuing producing music, and then I launched a record label, and it had started doing really well, actually, and to the tune where I was able to leave E&Y and triple my income right away. And so. So I did that full time for a number of years, and ended up, I had a record deal with the label in the UK actually, and toured the world for 5 years, every weekend. And so I really got to understand the entertainment side of how the business side works as well as the creative side. So having a record deal, I understood how to work with labels and things like that. Had a management team, agency, publicist, so that whole infrastructure, how to work in that world. And then on the label side, how to sign artists, how to think about territories and windowing content, licensing by territory and things like that. So I got the full experience. And from there, I was actually thinking about going to film school, and I learned a great deal about filmmaking. But then at the 11th hour, I realized that was a dumb move to go to film school, because if you're going to spend 150 grand, you better get something that's actually going to have a better ROI. So I went to business school, but it was always in the back of my mind that I wanted to really, use all of that knowledge on the music and then my passion for the film side. And so it was always in the back of my mind. And I joined BCG right after after business school. And there I worked for 6 years, just, in half in Asia and half in Europe and US. So I got a global perspective on that side. And actually, funny thing is, one of the projects I did at BCG was the Carlyle Fund wanted to invest in Scooter Braun's company, the Justin Bieber's manager. And so I did the diligence on that. So I got to, dig into every single artist's contracts, Kanye West's contract, and all of this. So I really got to see and understand the nitty gritty of how those contracts work and everything. And right after that, when I felt like consulting wasn't the way I wanted to spend the rest of my life, I thought of going back to entertainment. And I actually seeked out Sony because it had all the verticals I was interested in. It had the music side, had the television, had the film. And it was a natural fit because as soon as I interviewed with them, it just, the click was, the connection was there because I just understood intuitively the business. So again, it's not a path that you can plan. It's just an accidental path of getting here. So it's not, but I think it's just more following what your passions are, because eventually I think if you do that, you'll intuitively get the content, and and I think you can deliver a lot more value that way.
One of the things I often say is one of the, in some ways, challenges, but one of the most fascinating parts about working in entertainment media and breaking in is that it's never, hardly ever a linear path or a traditional path. And if that's not exhibit A, Palash's story, I don't know what is. I mean, that's a great example of, you get young people ask you and say, well, what do I do? What are the 3 steps? And you're like, well, boy, it can really vary. It's all over the map. And I think that's if you told Palash 15 years ago that you'd be DJing and then 15 years later you'd be a senior corporate executive at Sony, you probably would have laughed. And here you are. So thank you for that. That's great. Paul, so you were in the School of Foreign Service. So I hear that and I'm thinking, okay, Paul wants to be a diplomat or work for the, the government or foreign affairs. So help us understand. So when you were at Georgetown, is that what you thought you wanted to do and then later pivoted, or just help us understand that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I went to Georgetown really interested in politics, and as many people do, and interested in, everything sort of the School of Foreign Service represents. Much of, some of that is like negotiating and working on sort of deals, and that's stuff I still do. I don't think I would have been able to articulate that at the time, but those were the types of things I was attracted to. But I was always interested in media, and really overall I was interested in industries that had a real impact on people, on like doing something where anyone you would meet would go, oh, I know what that is. And I think that's true in sort of politics and most of what you do in DC. It may be in a more staid way, but certainly people know what goes on in Washington. But it's certainly true in the media business. And so I wasn't interested in one aspect as much as whether it be news or television or like entertainment or music. As much as I just thought the industry was a really great place to have an impact and a really great place to actually be able to affect people's lives. But I didn't know what to do after I graduated, and I just had sort of an interest. It wasn't something I worked on in undergrad, and I went to Accenture. I went to consulting, which, they came to the Career Center, and I just went in and interviewed, and they had a job in New York. And so I said, okay, I'm going to do that. And when I first, most of my beginning time at Accenture had nothing to do in these big consulting companies, right? It was just learning how to work in a big company. It wasn't, I think I did like HR projects, and universities were clients of mine. And then I ended up getting into the media practice by working for what was then Time Warner Cable, which is now, I guess, Spectrum, a cable company, which I never would have thought, even a year before would be an interesting or good place to go at all. I mean, no one looks at Comcast and is like, that's where I want to be. And I'm from Philadelphia, so I especially grew up thinking that. And but what I found was that role, and then I later went to, after they were being acquired, I later went to Verizon to do a similar role. What it allowed me to do was it allowed me to work with every company. So I worked with every television network group. I dealt with some of the studios for years, and I got to see how they all thought about the industry, which is very different. I got to see the difference between, companies that had large conglomerates versus smaller companies that you focused on unscripted versus places that had sports and broadcast. And that was incredibly valuable because it gave me a full sort of view of the industry and helped me kind of refine what I was interested in. Helped me sort of see all the different paths you can go down in this business. And then I did that for a number of years and then decided, what I really liked were roles where I was working with third parties, working with like external partners, and roles where I was sort of leaning into something new, which, the paid television industry, while interesting, was certainly was peaking and not really, where you go for innovation. So I decided that I wanted to just sort of go somewhere small, do something different, and go into the digital side of the business, work at a company that was not a traditional media company at all. And I did that for a little bit, going to a company called Refinery 29 for about a year, where a woman who was my client in my first job had, a couple of years later ended up running strategy and distribution for them. And then after that, I ended up getting an opportunity to come out to Los Angeles and join what, right around when AT&T was buying Time Warner, a sort of small digital division called Otter Media that owns a YouTube creator network, that owns a piece of Reese Witherspoon's production company, that owns an anime streaming service called Crunchyroll that has several million subscribers, owns a sort of digital content company called Rooster Teeth, a number of different things. And that was fantastic because it gave me an in into Warner Media, and it let me look at all of these different sort of new business models that were all completely different, and really try to understand kind of how they all worked. And all that was just me saying, okay, I need to learn, and I just need to lean into things that are new and different. And, whatever I do next from my next job, it just needs to be different than what I did before, or else I'm not learning. And my path to getting to the team to launch HBO Max was, I was just in Warner Media, and it was one of those things where I didn't apply for a job to do this. I joined a totally different division, but because it was a division that had those skills that the company didn't really have as a traditional media company, they tapped our group to come over and run HBO Max. Really, they tapped sort of the leadership of our group, and then I went with them. And that's often what happens, right? You just have to sort of lean into the things that are interesting to you and the things that are new, and then you never really know where that's going to lead. So I have also not had, I wasn't a music exec, creative, but I've also not really had a linear path. But the one thing that I have done in retrospect is just kind of always make sure that the next thing I did was different than the last thing, and really be flexible around what I found interesting. I don't think I would have ever 5 years ago or 10 years ago said that, working at a technology company and dealing with things like engineering and product teams, that seems so far away from entertainment, until you start to work at a Netflix or a Disney Plus or an HBO Max, and you realize, oh no, everything you see on the screen is built by those people. So you have to understand that in order to really make what we think of as entertainment and what we will think of as entertainment in 5 and 10 years.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Very, very interesting as well. So Molly, how about you? So you went to University of Pittsburgh undergrad. I think you did graduate work at Georgetown. That's your connection to Georgetown. But how about you? Because you've worked for some, super blue chip brands, and looks like you're working around the world. But love to know kind of what you were thinking about when you were leaving college and your first jobs.
Yeah. So when I went into college and when I left college, I didn't really have too much of an idea of what I really wanted to do. I think I knew a lot about what I didn't want to do, and the University of Pittsburgh is, renowned for medical and nursing schools. And I was, most of my friends in school have worked in medicine. I knew I didn't want to do that. I kind of, process of elimination, eliminated the fields where I didn't want to work, and I took a number of internships throughout undergrad at, the Red Cross in marketing, and at Juicy Couture in marketing and PR. And I think, kind of got a little bit closer every internship to what I knew I didn't want to do or what I did want to do. And then I interned with PNC Bank for 2 summers, once in Pittsburgh and then once in Washington, D.C. And then was offered a full-time job after graduation to come join their corporate banking development program. So it was kind of an opportunity to start in a higher, much like the Accentures and the consulting jobs of the world, start with a class of your peers and you know, access to training and you know, real kind of opportunities to kind of polish your work, presentation skills, and speaking with large corporate clients and understanding, you know, putting pitch decks together and positioning our offering for them. So yeah, did that for about 3 years. And then I think there were openings for kind of the next level up. I was a sales analyst and basically had an opportunity to become a sales officer, and kept kind of coming up with reasons why I wasn't going to go for that job. And ultimately then through that realized that it was not necessarily the path I saw myself on for a long term, and started to think about what else I could see myself doing. But taking the training and the learnings that I, you know, gathered from PNC and the people who kind of mentored me along the way. And that was actually when I began my program at Georgetown. So I did a certificate in digital media and marketing through the School of Continuing Studies. So I did that in evenings over about 9 months to a year. Because I think I had this inkling in my mind that, you know, I had an interest in media just from a consumption standpoint. And then the other thing that I had a real interest in was just kind of the structure and the opportunities that exist around kind of mutually beneficial partnerships when brands kind of come together, and what's possible when really smart partnerships can be structured and launched, and what's possible. And so I started kind of looking for jobs in that space and ended up moving to California. And for about a year, I worked for a really small company. It was about 3 people. Founded, you know, worked closely with the founder, who he partnered universities with businesses, and we would, you know, bring in real world challenges into university campuses all over the country. So working with kind of the Pepsis and the Hershey's of the world and their consumer insights or their branding or their market research teams. And then finding university classes that were studying the same thing and bringing them that real world opportunity to work on a real world project, and then have the brands, you know, give them access to new ideas and fresh perspective. And so I just thought the model was interesting. I had the opportunity to participate in a real world project at Pitt. I worked for the Pittsburgh Pirates, and we launched a whole marketing campaign across the campus. And it was probably my most educational experience I had while I was in school, presenting to their executive teams our learnings and all of that. So it was kind of a you know, something I was quite passionate about. And then through working for that company for about a year, brokered a number of partnerships between Fox Sports and 3 or 4 different universities through a partnership program that they had called Fox Sports University. And that program was essentially that framework with investment from Fox Sports. So it was all Fox projects across the whole organization, working with about 50 universities nationwide. And there was an opportunity as the program was growing that they were bringing on another person to help run that and grow that program. So I came on board, and that was kind of my foray into media. And it was kind of more from the passion of, you know, I grew up playing and loving sports, and but it was kind of the passion for the partnerships they brokered and the opportunities it presented, not only for students, but what it drove for the business as well. So grew the program from, I think, 25 schools to 50 schools over my 2 years working with them. And then we would, you know, with the investment the company made in the program, we would recruit from the program. We would bring the students' ideas to life. I partnered with Georgetown, so I don't know if there's anyone on here who's familiar with the program, who has worked, that would be interested to hear. But would bring the students' ideas to life as well. So bringing them onto production sets and shoots to see how an idea that they storyboarded in their dorm room, you know, went to become a piece of content that lived on Fox Sports social channels or the channels of our partners. So did a lot of work I was really proud of there, and loved, you know, the experiences that we were able to create and everything that I learned. It was also an incredible opportunity because we would bring the business leaders across all of Fox to campuses with us. So I got to pick the brains of and learn so much from our executives across the whole company about what their challenges were, what they were thinking about, what the ambitions were for their kind of product line or their team. So that was amazing. And then from there, had an opportunity. It was kind of through the partnerships, there was always an interest in my mind in generating revenue, and there was attempts through Fox Sports U to see if we could kind of drive sales for the business. But that was always kind of where my mind was going to. And then through that, had the opportunity to move to London and work for National Geographic. And I worked on their global partnerships team and looked after a relationship that we had with Rolex. And it was really exciting and a partnership that I was really honored to be a part of, because Rolex invested $10 million over about 3 years and funded exploration on kind of the National Geographic Society side, so the nonprofit and kind of non-media side. And then that investment was also split on the media side, where we then told the story of that investment. So it was amazing to work across all of National Geographic to kind of bring those stories together, but then work with people who are so much smarter than me on the science side, who are studying, incredibly important things. And actually the expedition they sent, just kind of as an aside, sent people to the top of Everest to build the world's tallest weather station, to take kind of samples and measurement, to kind of study the early effects of climate change. And that happened actually just after I left National Geographic, but the July issue of National Geographic is Everest edition. So incredible story out now actually on newsstand. So cool to have played a part in that. And then actually after about a year at National Geographic, I got recruited. I got a message on LinkedIn from a recruiter at CAA who was doing some work for Manchester United and wondered if I just want to have a conversation and learn about an opportunity. And I was interested, again, kind of was missing my time in sports. Again, kind of hugely proud of the work that I was able to be a part of at National Geographic, but was missing kind of the passion and emotion and excitement around sports. So I took the meeting and then kind of went through the interview process of, with the mindset of, who knows what will happen? Let's just see. And then ended up getting the role with United about a year and a half ago. So again, kind of similar to everyone's story, is a bit of a winding path. But I think kind of for me, the interest in unique partnerships is kind of what was my guide throughout all of my different moves. And I think, to go from Fox Sports, where it was kind of just unique partnerships, but then realizing I had the interest around kind of generating revenue or being closer to the revenue generating side, working with Nat Geo, the partnership was already brought in-house. So it was then activating it and delivering success, across the media channels and, working toward kind of generating that renewal business. But then now I think what I'm doing at Man U is really what I think I find so much fun, because it's finding those sponsorship dollars and bringing them in-house and, proving why brands should bring their dollars to us versus so many other different media platforms and whether it's digital kind of marketing channels or other sports properties, why it's fun every day to kind of prove that case. And it's something I really believe in and find very exciting. And literally every day is something new. There's the different brands and industries that we speak across. I learned things that I never thought I would learn in that job. So in this role. So that's kind of a bit of where I started and kind of how I got to where I am now. That's
great. Thanks so much. I'd like to ask for each of you, for your respective roles, what are with Palash, what do you think are the key traits that you need for success, or and what are the key traits that you draw on that you think help make you successful in your job, or are required to be successful in your job?
Right. I'll keep it really at the fundamental level. I think one is curiosity. I think a lot of what I do may not even traditionally fell in the scope of this role, but I kind of expanded my role just because of my interests and I didn't ask for permission. I just kept on expanding to include more and more things that I had a passion for. And So I think that's the one thing, is that curiosity followed by just, kind of, being proactive and doing things. And then I would say one of the biggest part is practical thinking. Like, a lot of times what I find is, if you're looking at a new opportunity, let's say you're evaluating a business, a lot of people can get into, frameworks of, this is what I should be looking for, this is what I should be doing, and all of those. But at the fundamental level, they don't really ask the basic questions. And when something comes up that looks a little odd, even if the CEO of the company is giving you guarantees saying that, but if it's odd, it's odd, and you have to kind of use your intuition, use your practical knowledge, and all of those things to kind of dig in to all of those kind of things. So I would say it's a combination of that. Obviously you need to understand the basics, of the job. In my role, finance, accounting, strategy, all of those things are given, that you have to have that. But on top of that, I think what differentiates people within the business is that I've met executives who have been with the company for 20 years, but they're not really, thinking at the level of just asking those fundamental questions a lot of times. And I've met with executives. I remember this one VP who's been there for 20 years, and I started as a VP. Within 1 year, I was promoted, and he was just shocked as to, okay, well, what did you do? And he wanted to have, lunch with me and to ask me all these questions. And I kind of give him the same point, is that, you kind of have to be doing the next role automatically before you even are considered for the next role. But don't ask for permission, and don't just do the role that you think you are supposed to do. Do to your best of your capabilities and expand that capability, and that'll help you kind of propel your trajectory in the role. And senior executives look for this sort of stuff. I mean, they're not, they can find 1,000 people who know how to do the job, but it's what you do above that really differentiates.
Good, great, thank you. Paul, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo that. I would also say just sort of creativity and I don't mean sort of artistic creativity, but I think in any kind of business, a lot of what I do is working with lots of different internal and external stakeholders, many of whom have very are much more sort of functional tasks, like are in performance, data-driven marketing, or our creative content teams, or our engineers. And they don't necessarily know how to talk to each other. And that's also true between companies. And I work with I've been involved in negotiations that are very contentious, and seems like interests are completely misaligned. And you have to find a way around that. And, I actually do think about this all the time. I had a professor in my pro seminar when I was a freshman in the SFS, and it was case studies in in foreign policy. It was like every week was a different diplomatic incident. And the thing he kept coming back to was that the way these things were solved was what he called leaps of imagination. And I think that, and obviously a less dire scale for what I do, that's often the case, where you're thinking about, here's a problem, or oftentimes it's not even a problem. Here's a way that we can do something differently, that we can work I can help teams internally or between different companies work together in a way that hasn't been done before. And you have to be pretty flexible in your thinking, and pretty creative, and really interdisciplinary in order to be able to do that. And that's where a lot of people fall short, is that they're very focused on the specific functional area that they do, and they don't think about the perspectives of people who do related and necessary and very similar things, but just in other companies that they work with, or other departments that they work with. And then sort of the corollary to that is just being, this is a very social industry, and it's a very extroverted industry. It's an industry where your currency is often not just who you know, but actually meeting lots of people. And so what's one of the things I like about this industry is that you can just ask anyone to go to lunch, and it's just a thing that people do. And that's great, because that's how you learn a lot of the stuff that I just said. And it's also how you end up being effective at your job, because you know people you've met people years ago and now you're both at the same company, or now you have your counterparts at different companies. And that happens a lot more than I ever would have thought starting out. It's a much smaller industry once you start working in it than it feels like from the outside.
Good. Yeah, I mean, I think the cultivation of relationships, and it is a very relationship-driven business and industry, and critical. How about you, Molly? I'm obviously being in sales and sponsorship. There are probably some other important skill sets you need.
Yeah, I would echo kind of I was jotting down some of the things that Palash and Paul were saying. I think the curiosity piece theme is certainly a good one. I think in the world of sponsorship, my mind kind of goes to how competitive the industry is, how competitive kind of even, our team of salespeople were competitive, with one another. And so I think the kind of, there's always more to be done. There's always kind of more, strategic thinking that you can do. There's always more prep you can do ahead of a meeting. So I think it's kind of that hunger and that drive to kind of be thinking, working hard, but also working smart, to, kind of not only structure your conversations, but building your relationships and progressing and advancing discussions so that you can kind of create urgency and moving conversations along. So I would say kind of that hunger and kind of recognizing that there's unlimited things that you could kind of continue to be doing to further your calls and further your deal. But I think there's also a case to be made or kind of something to be said for being kind of flexible and adaptable and open. Things change so quickly. I mean, we were playing football with 75,000 people in our stadiums one day, and the next day we weren't. So, I've been really kind of proud of and impressed by the way the team has evolved, and the club has evolved to the ways that we deliver for our partners, the way that we engage with our fans. It's kind of everyone throws around the unprecedented times, but I think the brands and the teams and the people who are able to kind of use this time to get stronger and more nimble and more creative, will come out stronger and more nimble and creative. So I think kind of that flexibility and that openness and adaptability to kind of going with the flow, there is kind of an intangible component to some of the deals that we come up with and some of the conversations we have, or the way relationships kind of ebb and flow. So, but yeah, then I think underpinning all of that is it's for me in my career, it's been about people. And I think for me, I mean, it's not necessarily kind of something that's, I guess it is actually, but the kind of leadership that I've worked with and for, I've worked, with poor leadership and really strong leadership. And I think where I've been the happiest and most successful and most engaged and kind of the hungriest has been where, I'm working with or for someone who I kind of not only see myself in, but want to kind of grow into them and their leadership style and their work ethic or their approach to work. So I think that kind of has been a piece that has also guided me through my career, is just kind of the not only the relationships I've built, but the people that I kind of gravitate toward, and trusting that instinct and following kind of down that path.
I think, I've had the fortune of working with a number of salespeople in my career. And I think another piece to it that I think it's important for this audience to hear about from you is just how much resiliency and perseverance is required. And I'm always so admired salespeople because, it's sort of like you hear from actors that you have to hear a no a lot. And how do you turn a no into a yes? So talk a little bit about that, because that's so critical too.
Yeah, absolutely. You kind of gave me a flashback to my first kind of heartbreak at Man U. The deals that you kind of put the months of work into, and sometimes in our world it's all the trips that you're traveling all over the world to, away from loved ones, and putting that time in and those air miles in. And yeah, when it doesn't work, it certainly hurts, because you certainly, I feel like there's a kind of a time when a deal gets to a point where you believe in it so much that you're like, I can't see how this can't work, but these decisions aren't made in a vacuum, and there's a million factors and board decisions and budgets and budget timelines and priorities, and leadership can leave, and you could have had a relationship with someone who's moved jobs, and so there's so many reasons for no's, and it usually isn't personal. So I think kind of primarily remembering that it's it's business at the end of the day, but it does sting, but then you kind of learn from every no, and you learn from, I remember my first weeks at the job, I would kind of sit in on calls. So we would we send, in terms of our strategy, we kind of approach industries as a whole. And then we kind of identify the top performing brands within that industry, and then send them kind of packages. So they'll get a shirt and a brochure about us and some materials, and then I get a notification in my Salesforce to say your pack's landed at X company, give them a call and get on the phone with them. So there's very much not cold leads, but you're picking up the phone and saying, hi, this is Molly from Manchester United. Did you get our package, and do you have time to talk? And so I remember kind of the early days and sitting and listening in to my colleagues having those conversations, and feeling like I felt so a world away from being able to turn a no into a yes. But every no, you get the practice and you get the reps, and you have a few awkward calls, and you get your kind of legs under you, and then kind of before you know it, you're presenting in front of CEOs and CMOs and structuring and negotiating deals that you I wasn't really wrapping my head around before I started. So I think every no is a learning experience, and kind of makes you a little bit stronger and smarter and savvier for the next one.
That's great. Thank you for that. Well, let's turn it over to our participants here. Again, either in the chat room, or if anyone wants to just raise their hand and ask a question. Don't be shy. No question's a bad question, I can assure you that. Is there anyone who'd like to ask a question now?
I have a question, mostly directed towards Palash and Molly, but also Paulie around the SFS. For people who want to work abroad at some point in their careers, or straight out of college, what sort of advice do you have when it comes to looking for a job overseas?
Do you want to start, Molly, or?
Sure. Yeah.
Molly, you want to start? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So how I was able to move abroad was I was working at Fox Sports at the time, and National Geographic was actually under the 21st Century Fox umbrella. So because it was an internal company move, they were able to sponsor my visa that enabled me to then come over here and work. So visas can be incredibly competitive. There's a number of ways you can kind of go about it. When I was initially looking at it, there was kind of one avenue I could have gone down, where I would apply for the job, but then they had to basically prove that they interviewed every other person that had applied, and that nobody could do what I could do in all of the pool of people who were legally able to work here in the UK. And so for me, I mean, it was a pretty seamless process. So to kind of, maybe if you have kind of international ambitions, get a start at organizations that have that global footprint, because then there's usually it's less risk. My manager basically called my future manager and vouched for me, and it's less risk, and they're kind of hiring in-house. So that was my experience and how I was able to do that.
For me, it was right after business school, and I would echo Molly's point about a global organization. So I was recruited into BCG, and they gave me an option of different offices, and so I could have stayed in the DC office or gone to Southeast Asia. So I chose Southeast Asia because, one, I wanted the completely different experience, and just really understanding the international business, especially in Asia, because I thought it would be a significant part of the world, and understanding how to do business in that part of the world is important. But with a big company, getting a work permit was not an issue. Also, BCG pays almost the same no matter where you are in the world. So that also helped. because before BCG, I had an offer from IFC for Southeast Asia as well, in Indonesia, but it's a different organization. They were doing a local contract, so your income was based on local conditions versus global conditions. So I think that was a big driver. And then when you look at international roles, I think the other part is what are you going to contribute? Like, what's unique from your perspective? What's your story that you can contribute to a region? That's helpful. And then for the longer term, you have to think about what you're going to get from that region that's transferable back when you come back to the States. So those two things really were important for me, because I based myself out of Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, but I was working in Singapore, Japan, in China, India. And I thought that, and BC just works with these large multinational corporations. And so I thought the experience would be helpful, because then when I come back to the States, the kind of companies that I would consult with probably have divisions in Europe, in Asia, or they have ambitions to go to Asia. So then you can contribute something back when you come back. So I think it's important to kind of, to think about those aspects.
One other thing I'd add too is, especially if you're a younger employee at a company, is if you have an opportunity, if you're working in the States, but you have an opportunity to work on any kind of international project, raise your hand and be aggressive about it. And the obvious value of that is learning about that particular region, but also developing relationships with people at your company in those places. So if you then raise your hand, do a great job, and then it turns out maybe they're launching a new product there or a new division there, and you've been helping them, then you can say, and by the way, I've really wanted to live in France, for example. So, you've now developed that relationship. So certainly raising your hand in that way and being aggressive about it I think can be very helpful. I'm seeing a question in the chat room. This is for all of you guys. Do you have advice on approaching and taking on horizontal roles within your organizations, especially ones completely different from your skill set or previous experiences for personal growth?
I could start. I think when you're inside the company, first of all, you have an advantage, and it starts with relationships. Obviously you want to think about what relationships you have in the other department. And if you have none, start somewhere. And maybe you don't start straight at the top, but maybe you start to kind of build, so that you have a knowledge base of that division. And ultimately, I think it comes down to what can you contribute? There's something you can contribute to that group. So for example, at Sony, we recently, a couple of years ago, launched a lower cost television production arm. And, so for me, even though I'm in corporate development strategy, I have a passion for getting on the actual content side. And so what I had done is I called up the new leader and, met with her and offered her really research assistance. I said, I'll moonlight when I have extra time, because you have to really think about, for her, the market, the target market, who are the buyers, what's the consumer, preference and things like that. Things that maybe she didn't, really have that much bandwidth to do. So I offered those type of support. And that, that helped build a relationship. And now there's, a more dialogue. And I do that along different divisions, just kind of inching my way to get to eventually something that I really want to do on that side.
Yeah, I would say that being in a large organization, like a large global organization, is really, really helpful. And I've worked at a number of big companies. One of the reasons I'm going to Google is because it's the biggest I've worked at, and it's by far the most global, and it does the most things. And once you're in these places, the ability you have to just sort of pick up the phone or ask someone for an introduction, and you can start working with people without them having to actually hire you. So in their division, so there's no risk for them. And I think that's enormous advantage. So, kind of getting in is often so much more important than trying to find like the perfect role at, Netflix or something. Just sort of get in and you can make things work out.
And Google has a real, gets a lot of credit for being very fluid about that. I know in general, I have a lot of friends there who, if you work in one area and you really want to work in another area, it's very encouraged at that company, which you don't always see, particularly in sort of old school Hollywood.
I think I think the tech is really changing a lot of that, and I've seen it over the last decade, like across corporate America. But this also goes back to the question about working abroad, which is something that I've always wanted to do and been interested in, but just worked at more domestically focused companies. And in traditional media companies, they can be very bifurcated. It can be very like there's an international division and no one ever talks to them, and like the CEO. And so you don't always have those opportunities. And because of the way tech is, the internet is just global in nature, all of that's breaking down right now. And so, even at Warner Media over the last 2 years, the degree to which there were people who worked there for 20 years who never knew each other and now talk every day, that's happening across every level of the company. And so those opportunities are starting to present themselves more and more, which is pretty exciting.
Good. Another question from someone?
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, we got one here. How can someone get started in the creative side by pitching content or a new show idea?
From inside the company, or is it just as in just outside pitching?
I think probably just outside. Yes, outside.
Oh, that's a tough one. Because it's tough because, there are traditional barriers, as in, getting the meeting is a tough, first step. I tell you what is changing that is, as Paul mentioned, I think the more tech-oriented companies are changing the game. So for example, Netflix, will listen to a lot more things than a traditional studio, right? And so because of that, and because Netflix will finance a show on their own and things like that, and because they're real competition studios, it's now studios are being more open to hearing more things and things like that. So I think if you're not in the industry, my recommendation is to find somebody to partner with at the beginning that can at least open the door and get you the meeting. If you have a great idea for show on your own, it's worth something. With a partner that can open doors, it's worth something else. I always say, 100% of something, 100% of nothing is nothing versus, 20% of something is more than 100% of nothing. So a lot of times people in the creative side are very protective of what they have, and because of that, they actually never get to the next step because they can't open the doors or make things happen. And I think there are people in the industry that can make things happen but don't have a lot of creative ideas. And then there are a lot of creative idea folks that can't make things happen. So the first step in my recommendation is to kind of find the other half and get in. And once you're in and you're working, I think then you can kind of have more options.
The other thing I would say is, and Palash hit on some barriers. One other major barrier, certainly in Hollywood, is legal barriers, which is companies typically aren't allowed to take unsolicited material. So if you came up with a terrific TV show idea and sent it off to Sony, they're not going to list, they're not going to take it because there's legal liability that if they pass on that or they don't want it, and then they create another show that's similar to that, they're afraid that the person who sent that first pitch may try to sue them and say, you stole my idea, which again, everyone thinks their idea is unbelievably unique and different. It's not always the case. So, and it's a conundrum because how are you going to ever get in, right? And so then the key is to try to get representation. And if you have representation, an agent or a manager, they're the ones who can go in for you. But then how do you get an agent manager if you don't have any material to show them that you've created for? So there's a terrible sort of there's a terrible sort of catch-22 there. But I would say my biggest piece of advice is to is to create material and write material and develop material. And that could be what's called like a spec script, like you can watch a TV show and then try to create a version of that show for yourself, one of their episodes. But to have your own material, and then if you can get connections into people who are willing to read it or willing to look at it, again, that's a great way to use certainly the Georgetown Alumni Network. You'd be amazed how many creatives we have in our business who, as a friend, of being a Georgetown alum, they would maybe read it and give you advice on how to make it better, or maybe even give you advice on somebody you could meet with. So it is a challenging issue. The only other thing I'd say is an interesting new development in the industry that technology is allowing for is to democratize content. At Imagine, where I was at last year, they've created you should look this up, it's called Imagine Impact, which is basically a global platform that allows people to submit material and and then these folks at Imagine read the material, and then they end up people that they think have interesting stuff they work with together. And so for instance, they just did a deal with Netflix, where Netflix, to Palash's point, Netflix said, we're looking for a certain genre of movies. Hey, Imagine Impact, we'll partner with you. Go out to your thousands of people that have who've distributed content to you that they've created, and tell them, we're looking for, I'm making it up, horror movies right now, and then let them submit to you. And then we would love to work with you. And you find the 10 best ones or the 5 best ones, and then bring them to us at Netflix. So if you have a really passionate idea, definitely go to Imagine Impact. And there are others too. I don't know the names of them. There are several others that are doing that in the business, which is a really interesting new way to sort of turn the industry on its head and help people who have great ideas but don't have that representation, which is always an issue.
The only other thing I would just add is with technology now, you can create content relatively low cost.
Yeah, that's the other point. Great point. Create your own YouTube channel, you know. You can,
well, right, because I mean the thing is, you know,
excellent point.
Many big primetime shows today started off as some sort of a YouTube or podcast idea. So you know, I think people want to see examples. So, you know, with YouTube or podcast, what you can say is you could prove that you have an audience, right? That there's a certain number of audience, and at the end of the day, you have to always put yourself in their shoes. Is they're looking for content that engages audience. If you can prove that to any degree, it just helps your cause.
That's a great point. One final question here. And actually, I may have one last one if people can hang for another minute or two, but how often do you find yourself interacting with legal teams in your day-to-day? Is it more email correspondence in regards to projects, or are you having face-to-face meetings with your company's legal teams? Paul, why don't you take that one first?
I
know the answer to that for you.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
I work extensively with legal teams, and I have in every role I've had in this industry, face-to-face, emails, Word doc notes of contracts. I work, most of the jobs I've had have been negotiating contracts. That's been a core part of the job. And so I'm frequently like in documents with legal teams, working with them, which I've actually really enjoyed, because as a business person, you get to do all of the sort of fun parts of legal job, but none of the really onerous parts, which is also great.
For me, extensively. I feel very extensively. Yeah, it's more than I wish to, because I think, as Paul mentioned, the details are very painful, and 200-300 page documents where you're arguing about the definition of, like, recently it was a definition of relative of how do one define relative, who's included, who's not included. These kind of things are, that just take up a lot of time. So a lot.
Yeah, and I think for us, our IP is the most valuable asset we own at United. So protecting that and making sure that our partners are protecting that as well is paramount to everything we do. So in terms of, selling, our legal team's not really involved, but once it comes down to kind of contract negotiation and structuring the deals, it is, yeah, a roadshow with the legal team, camped out wherever the prospect is.
Great. So I think just to finalize our session here quickly, I'd like each of you to quickly give one piece of advice you'd have for someone who wants to break into your part of the industry. Palash, why don't we start with you? You had one piece of advice.
Just take any job you can get to, to get in. I think Paul mentioned that before as well, which is don't worry so much about the job that, that gets you in the door, because once you're in the door, you'll meet people and you can go lateral. It's all about relationships, but you can't build those relationships if you're on the outside. So just find any job and just get in and let it, see where it takes you.
Yeah. Molly?
Yeah, I would echo that, just in the lens of, even if you have an internship and you hate it, or a first job and you hate it, learning what you don't want to do is just as valuable as learning what you do want to do. And every job and role that you take gets you a little bit closer to, finding out what it is it gets you a little bit closer to your path. So I think it's, I would echo Palash to say, take the roles if you're not sure, and then you can kind of build the relationships, and the path does kind of wind from there. So yeah.
Great, thank you. And Paul?
Yeah, I agree with what was said, and also I would say push yourself to do things that are different, either within the same role or when next role, if you're looking for something new, that are slightly different than what you've done before. So you're learning something new, because this industry is changing so quickly that if you don't push yourself to grow with it, you'll find yourself kind of getting left behind. And then I would also say, recognize that careers are long, and the relationships you make are, can be for decades. It doesn't always feel that way when you're, 24 or 25, but I have people I'm very close with who I met through work in my early 20s who are close personal friends, but also, have been instrumental in helping me get this role at Google, because they happened to work with the team when I got an, interview, and that was coincidence. But you kind of enter this industry informally with a class of people, and they're going to be your peers for your whole life. And that network is incredibly valuable.
Excellent. Great advice from all of you. This has been terrific. I hope everyone in our on the panel enjoyed it, and I hope everyone who's participated has learned a few important nuggets and will help you along the way. I really appreciate Molly, Palash, and Paul. Thank you for your time. Good luck to all of you and all of your endeavors. Good luck to everyone. Be safe and healthy. And thank you again. And we'll have our fourth session next week. So Hoya Sachs at everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
so much, guys. I appreciate
Bye.
it. Have a good day. Take care.
Thanks again.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.